Okay, welcome back then. It is late June 1852. I think we last left off in early June, and I passed turn, so this is going to be a bit of a report back. May even play through one turn this time because I have a bit of a plan, and it may be worth experiencing the results of that together. What has happened then? So we can see that the situation on the Western Front has developed a little bit. The Russians took Varna. Varna is not fortified, but it did have a garrison in place, and that garrison has surrendered to the Russians, resulting in us losing 2 units. They gained 5 victory points, and we've lost another national morale point. We're now down to 97. And the Russian situation is to some extent salvaged, which is obviously really disappointing for us. It's a bit of a mixed bag, because on the one hand we can say that, well, Ritsa on the surface has won 2 pretty convincing victories against the Russians. The first one, a pretty significant and substantial defensive victory, when the Russian main army under Paskovich sort of plunged headlong into Adrianople, and then he counterattacked rather late in the day, allowing the Russian force to recover somewhat. He counterattacked, and it looked like the Russian force was set to break off at first contact. There was only 1 round of combat, and we had about 20,000 casualties each. But there's 2 big battles at Adrianople. Both of them have been successful. But this really goes to show the problem with caution, or too much caution in the high command. The problem here is that we have the main Russian field army has now fallen back to Rumelia, and is linked up with smaller forces to the rear. This force is comprised of 4 divisions. It's perhaps a little larger than an army corps. And then we have another force which we don't have much information on in Varna, which has just taken Varna, which has 1 regular formation, which could be anything from a brigade to an entire corps, plus a supply detachment. This Russian force, which has experienced, 40, 60, 70,000 casualties, since it landed in Adrianople. I say landed, since it kind of moved into Adrianople about a month ago or so, is now in a position where it can receive supplies. Now, it is at the end of a very strained supply system. They have to draw supplies from Odessa, and those supplies are only really going to get as far south as about Varna, really, before they start having problems. But the force in Varna has a supply detachment attached to it, so that can theoretically move south and be sort of linked in to Paskovich's army, which would deal, it would kind of mitigate his supply problems and this sort of thing. And there's substantial mixed forces in Constanta itself that contain supply trains, so they can now get a sort of a shuttle system, not dissimilar to what we were doing in the Red Sea, actually, during the kind of Yemen, the sort of Yemen kind of emergency. They can get a bit of a shuttle system going, which would ensure that Paskovich's army can receive supplies. He's going to start receiving replacements now. He's no longer isolated. Now, if it were the case that after Ritsa's first and magnificent defense at Adrianople, where he inflicted 40,000 casualties, if he had exploited that at that moment, went onto the offensive, we would have had a Russian army completely isolated, and it would have been mauled. We could have, sort of rolled up much of this army, and this would have been a really convincing victory. The problem is that by being overly cautious, what Ritsa has done is sort of thrown away the victories that he's achieved. Despite having achieved 2 victories against the Russian army, the Russians are in our territory. They're taking towns, and you sort of think now he's in a really strong position. You have the kind of spearhead, the main Russian army sitting out in Rumelia, is heavily depleted. They've padded the force out with smaller formations, increasing the command strain, giving Paskovich a 20% command penalty. Their organisation is low. They look very low on supplies and ammunition. And because of our kind of system of switching out reserves in Adrianople, we have Ritsa Pasha in a really strong position. All of his forces are well supplied. They are all combat worthy. They are completely organised. All of the forces are ready for combat. And Ritsa Pasha could theoretically move headlong through Rumelia, Varna, up to Constanta, pinching off the Russian force besieging Plevna, and he would probably he'd be able to brush aside it all before him, and he's not prepared to do that. He's not activated. He does not want to conduct offensive maneuvers this turn, and you kind of think, by the bowels of Christ, if not now, then when? Because the longer he leaves it, the more the situation is going to become problematic, as Paskovich's army begins to receive replacements and supplies and this sort of thing. What we have then is an army that is once again going to quickly arrive at full strength, combined with possibly another couple of corps worth of forces, which then puts us really outnumbered, outgunned. And it's quite likely also that this force under Baryatinsky, his corps, which is besieging Plevna, has already partially breached the structure. Now, Plevna has quite a large depot, and we're hoping, I think, it'll probably be able to hold out for some time yet. But once Plevna falls, that ends, the Russian supply problems, really. That means they have a depot in northern Bulgaria, which will be linked, it's kind of linked up. The way to see these depots is that, you could sort of imagine they have a kind of ring around them. And once these rings kind of interlock, then it means that supplies from kind of your national stockpile begin to kind of nudge along. They begin to move along, and this then allows your forces to kind of draw on those supplies. Once these forces are outside that ring, which is, if you imagine the ring at Odessa probably goes about as far south as Varna, then the supplies they draw on is the supply train, the supply convoy they have attached to them. And of course that gradually, inevitably kind of depletes. And the only way then to function outside of the range of a depot is to shuttle the supply trains in between the depot and the field command, which is probably what the Russians are going to do here. Very likely Burgess or Rumelia is going to fall next turn. I mean, this garrison is very small. It's it's a kind of tokenistic force of 3,200 men. So it's starting to get frustrating. We're starting to hemorrhage national morale. Despite winning victories against the Russians, it feels like they have the upper hand. They still have the initiative, and they shouldn't have the initiative. So I have a plan for Adrianople. Back to that in a moment. In the east, then, Hussein Avni has arrived at Kars. Obviously, he's at the end of a long march. His forces are going to be slightly disorganized and disheveled, and this is tough terrain, so he's not activated this term. That's fine. I can look the other way on that. And Abdi's force will be arriving in 2 days' time, and he's in the same sort of situation. We don't know where the main Russian army that was operating in eastern Anatolia is. It doesn't appear, in terms of the reconnaissance that we can get anyway, it doesn't really appear that it's in Tiflis or Erevan. So it's possibly fallen back somewhere. It's out of sight. The amount of information you get with regard to an enemy force is kind of subject really to the kind of mobility of adjacent forces. So, for example, this cavalry brigade, a very small force, has fallen back from Rumelia. We've got this set to kind of retreat if engaged, and the function of this very small force of 1,500 men is just to provide us with information. We're going to move up and down here, and this will provide us with reconnaissance information. So reconnaissance is gleaned from really the mobility factor of the forces that you have in adjacent territory. Mobility essentially meaning cavalry. Cavalry, because infantry formations are much more static, they're more cumbersome, they sit in front of really only a portion of an opposing force. They can only really get a very undeveloped picture of what the kind of scale, the character of the enemy force is. Cavalry forces provide much more reconnaissance because they can move around, even, I don't just mean strategically like this force, even on a tactical basis in one territory. Obviously we don't order them to do it, but they naturally move around and provide us with a picture. That falls within certain criteria, and there's a thing about this game I really love. There's lots of kind of layers, it's very textured. The other criteria being, of course, is that no matter how much mobility you have, this also depends on the nature of the terrain the enemy force is sitting in. If it has dense forestry, or it's very hilly or mountainous, then a portion of your opponent's force is going to be concealed by foliage and sort of dead ground. So anyway, that's kind of the purpose of these kind of smaller kind of mobile forces. And the reason this is relevant, of course, is because in Eastern Anatolia we don't have a huge amount in the way of mobile forces. We do have a cavalry brigade sitting in Van, but we can't see really where this main Russian force has gone. And it could still be here. It could just still be that it's completely concealed by the mountainous terrain. Now, the real development in Eastern Anatolia is a Russian force, in fact an army corps, a grenadier corps, which is like a guards corps no less, has landed in Trabzon and is besieging the fortress there. On the surface of it, it looks like a bit of a daft move, because this army corps doesn't have any supply attached to it as far as we can see. It cannot be supplied by the coaling station, because the coaling station is within the citadel in Trabzon. So our garrison here can be supplied, and is larger actually than the corps that is besieging it, and yeah, the supplies in this army corps are going to gradually kind of deplete unless the Russians force some kind of move into Batumi. They do have a degree of military control in Batumi, although we can't see anything there, but that suggests that force has moved through here. It wouldn't have been the army corps, the Grenadier Corps, because we actually saw this Grenadier Corps land. This may have happened because this may have been a part of a larger kind of amphibious operation that has become disrupted and broken up by engagements with British or French navies, or even our own fleet. When our own fleet sunk significant kind of Russian forces, those forces may have been initially attached to this Grenadier Corps. And furthermore, we have spotted additional forces to the rear of this Grenadier Corps, which are at sea. There is fog of war in this game, and what we see at sea is obviously subject to what can be spotted from land, and also the fact that we have merchants constantly operating in the Black Sea that can reveal at least a portion of what is happening. You know, this is what we can see. It doesn't mean to say that's all that's there, sort of thing. So we, at the very least, know that some Russian forces are at sea. These aren't naval forces. These are riverine transports, and they've been sort of spotted in the eastern Black Sea. So it may be that the Russians are planning a more significant operation. This is problematic in fairly obvious ways. I mean, obviously, this is to the rear kind of our spear tip, which has just moved into Kar, and these forces, because they've just come at the end of a move, and Abdi Pasha's 2 days left, really, are not activated, fairly understandably. So we don't have really anything that can counter this. That said, the Russians are in no position to move inland, unless they have Trabzon itself. We'll keep an eye on this. I don't think at this stage, this looks more like a Russian mistake than any kind of very clever move. But as we know anyway, from the situation in the West, even if it is a mistake, the Russians are pretty adept at salvaging rather tricky situations, and that is exactly what they've managed to do with their kind of failure, their sort of failed gambit at Adrianople. So all we can do is keep an eye on it. You know, like the Bashi Bazooks, the irregular forces, are fanning out to provide some kind of continuous sort of front line. I mean, this is not really the era of continuous front lines, but at the very least we can kind of have a continuous force that is spotting. If these smaller forces land at Trabzon, we don't want them moving inland and sort of taking territory to our rear, especially not, for example, down here we have a depot here, and we have a depot also in Ankara. So for the time being, all we can really do, frankly, is keep an eye on the situation. We can't respond to it in the short term. Once Hussein Avni is rested, he's activated, and he might be in a position to move. That could change things. You know, we could move into sort of... actually, I don't think we can. One of the problems with this terrain, mountainous terrain, is it limits where we can move and how we can move. We don't just mechanically move into an adjacent territory. In reality, Hussein Avni would have to move back, which might even be worth getting him to do that now, because Abdi's going to be there in 2 days' time. Let's do that. Thinking on our feet. Even though he's just got there, and this is probably going to be the most amazingly tedious thing in order for his troops to receive, having arrived at Kar, lifted the siege, gained some measure of military control, allowed the garrison to begin to conduct repairs to the citadel. Within a day or two, he's being told to kind of move back. So probably not welcome news, but unfortunately, a fluid kind of military situation requires that. We are getting some supply forces head north. In terms of supply, now we have a bit of a plan. I'm going to let you in on this plan. We're going to detach this supply force from our division, kind of mixed division in Benghazi, and let's get these boys up to Adrianople. One thing I did do, is I decided to kind of sortie the kind of raiding cruiser squadron, if you like, or the 3 cruiser squadrons. The reason being is, even though it wasn't completely organised and ready, it did have supplies, and my thinking was, this is late June, it's high summer, the weather is very calm, the seas are very kind of gentle. We can see, hovering our mouse over, we can see that the weather in this box here is consistently really, really nice. This is the kind of war season, and if we're going to really be engaging Russian ships, it's now. We don't want these guys to be rested coming back out at the end of the summer as we enter into October, where the weather becomes rather difficult and they're less likely to see Russian ships. So I'm just thinking, let's make the most of this time of year, Now, the plan is... Reza Pasha doesn't want to attack. He's a cautious general. He doesn't fancy it. Fine. We can't do anything about that, But It doesn't mean to say that we can't do anything about the forces under his command. Now, Omar Pasha, in command of the Imperial Guard, if we detach him, he is actually activated. Left to his own devices, he's prepared, more than prepared, to engage in offensive maneuvers. And he's not the only one. Let's have a look who else. Okay, so we've got Zaif Mustafa. If we detach his force, he is also activated and prepared to engage in offensive maneuvers. Khurshid I have already checked, he's not, but Abdul Karim Nadir is also activated and is prepared to engage in offensive maneuvers. So what we have is a commander that just does not want to move, but his junior staff are aggressive. They are prepared to move. They want to engage in offensive maneuvers. So if we have got command points 13 and 12, so let's attach an artillery brigade. We now have Omar Pasha's corps is formed. Further to that, we have another army corps which has 13 and our force in it requires 12. We have 13. Let's do the same. Let's attach one of these independent artillery brigades and attach that, and that's Zaif Pasha's corps. Now, our plan is to get these forces to move as independent corps commands. They are all set to an offensive posture, and left to their own devices, they are happy to conduct an offensive against the Russians. These forces combined are fairly substantial. It's 3 army corps. It's basically it's the kind of the guts of this army, really. And I think we're in a position. If we look, for example, at Omar Pasha alone with the Imperial Guard, his combat factor is almost the same as the remnants of Paskovich's army. If we move all of these armies simultaneously, basically we're going to lose some concentration because these forces are functioning as independent commands. So the battle is going to be much less neat, much less ordered. But the trade-off is we get to kind of mitigate Rita Pasha's caution and unpreparedness to engage in offensive maneuvers. We can move Rita Pasha up there also, which we intend to do, albeit set to a defensive posture. But this is my thinking. Let's have a look then. Omar Pasha's force set to offensive posture, set to all-out attack. My thinking is we have a closing window here to deal with this situation before Paskovich's command receives replacements and supplies and begins to become much more of a serious problem. So I think we have to deal with this sort of sooner rather than later. But I'm not prepared just to engage him there. He may be set to fall back. We don't want to fall for that trick again. So Omar Pasha, set to an offensive posture, is going to move through Rumelia and up to Varna. It's going to take him 9 days to do that. He's not going to do that alone. He's going to be joined by Zaif Mustafa, and he's going to be joined in turn by Abdul Karim Nadir. Abdul Karim Nadir is slightly faster, 7 days. Omar is 9. Now let's have a look. We can... No, we don't do that. That's 3 army corps moving to Varna simultaneously. In addition to that, we're going to move Rita Pasha's force to do the same. It's kind of trailing behind, following along. It's going to take him 12 days to move the same distance. So my thinking is we deal with the remnants of Paskovich's force quickly. These forces will be here within 2 or 3 days, and we pursue it. If it falls back, we pursue that force to Varna, and also deal with an additional force here. We don't even know, our intelligence is so limited, we don't even know the name of this commander, and we don't know the size of this force. Now, the risk here is there is a march to the sound of the guns effect, which is to say that the real problem is, even though Paskovich's force is depleted, it's sustained damage, it's low in supplies, neighbouring commanders might very well, depending on their posture, move in to support him. That said, even with the combined force that they have here, we still might be able to pull this off. It is a risky move. If it doesn't come off and we're defeated, it happens. We've experienced 2 victories. My thinking is we can't be cautious. We can't just sit here and wait for the Russians to take Plevna and to kind of, cannibalize our Balkan territories whilst we win successive defensive engagements at Adrianople. It won't suffice to do that. We would lose anyway. Our national morale would sink. People would lose faith in the kind of high command. So we have to we have to take a risky, aggressive maneuver. The basis for our success is going to be aggression, speed, maneuver, and poise, because we have a smaller army than the Russians, and we are not going to get any of those things from Rita Pasha in the last analysis. That's the plan. That's what we're going to do as we transition from late June to early July. In terms of any other military moves, I don't think we're going to do anything else. The Imperial fleet, we've got a transport squadron sitting tight, is in Constantinople. That's going to continue to kind of build up its organization and cohesion, receive supplies. It's quite short of supplies, and it will draw supplies, of course, from the supplies that we have in the capital. It's really easy with kind of war, kind of sustained warfare, to overlook economic activity, but we can see by looking at Constantinople, as we noted at the beginning of June, our textile factory was completed. Our shipbuilding plant is continuing to be constructed, as is an additional textile factory, and fort upgrade, which will take about a year or something like that, is continuing in Constantinople. Constantinople is the center, is the focal point for construction in the Ottoman Empire for the time being. It's, sort of paramount importance. That city is held at all costs, really. Let's have a quick look at Aden. So we can see in Aden the situation has stabilized. The Yemeni forces have fallen back to the south, and that's really all we intended to do. There's nothing else I think we'll do here. We'll keep this force in place. Let's have a look. In fact, let's set this to a defensive posture that speeds up its kind of cohesion and regain, and we'll sit that force outside the city at Sana'a. A very quick look at the economy. There's no detailed economic report to deliver. We have got our kind of exports set. We've got 4 gems sitting in the vault. Some of those will be transferred into state revenue. We are beginning to build up a nice stockpile of state revenue, and I'm thinking that soon, maybe the next, our state revenue has been strained really since kind of February time through the construction of fortresses, which, they're not cheap. They're not colossally expensive, but they're not cheap. So we've begun the construction of a fortress in Sofia, in Salonika. We've begun upgrading the fortress in Constantinople, and we've also begun a fortification, of course, of Erzurum. So that's a number of fortresses. That's a lot of state expenditure. That, in addition to the fact that we've kind of furnished and trained an entirely new army corps. An army corps is not a small thing. It's 30 to 40,000 men. So it's a fairly substantial increase in the size of our army. However, I think that the next thing will be to build another corps. We're going to have to sit tight and wait. We do have enough manufactured goods. We do have enough manpower for that. But what we really need is state revenue. So we're going to sit tight, watch our state revenue trickle up, try not to put any more demands on the exchequer for the time being, and then we'll release those funds when the opportunity arises, and we'll probably deposit that force. We could deposit it in the east. We could have an additional army corps in the east, but the threat in the east feels like it's subsided momentarily, whereas the situation in the west is getting a little bit desperate. The good thing here is if this goes south, if like this offensive fails and we're defeated, we take it on the chin. We fall back to Adrianople. We've got a really decent citadel here. It's well stocked with supplies. It's got a big garrison, and of course, we have an entire reserve army corps there. So instantly, if one of these corps was almost wiped out, it could be instantly replaced, and that's the advantage of our kind of rotation system that we've set. That's kind of our plan, So I think that's it. In terms of reports, the only other thing is it is a feature of warfare that it accelerates. It momentarily kind of creates a sort of explosive kind of discoveries and this sort of thing, and we can begin to see now a number of this. Might be due to the presence of kind of British and French ships and troops and some engineers in our territory because of our alliance. That we're kind of getting a slew of technologies that are becoming realized. Some of them are only theoretical developments and this sort of thing. So one of the important ones here, I think, is we completely understand and can harness the possibilities of transport and infrastructure. And that has obvious ramifications in terms of railroads and things like this. If we have a look and see if we can see the read up, the more things that we discover, the less we're ever going to be able to do this in any kind of timely fashion. So Go quickly with the description. Large-scale industrial development and commerce required massive investment in the means and scale of transportation. Throughout the 19th century, debates continued over the relative role to be played by public and private investment in the infrastructure development. A century of commerce that began largely dependent on dirt roads and coastal shipping found its end in continent-spanning webs of railroads, canals, and transoceanic transportation. So, the realization of this really is an understanding among Ottoman economists and industrialists that the basis for developing a modern industrial society is going to be looking at new innovative transportation methods and moving goods en masse to large ports like Constantinople. So we can see, what's going to flow from this. Really, we can see the teething of the Industrial Revolution in the Ottoman Empire here. Not a huge amount more to report in terms of economic developments. We are seeing a little bit of a drop-off. The strange thing is here is they're actually shifting at more, if not about the same number of goods in terms of quantity, just yielding slightly less in terms of private capital. So this is quite likely much more due to down to price fluctuation, this kind of thing. Balance of trade is still bad, but it is precisely because we're at war. We're hoarding as many manufactured goods as we can. Not much else to report there on economic activity. We always keep an eye on our economic activity. We'll quickly scroll through various intelligence reports, see what foreign powers are up to and this sort of thing. And nothing too alarming or worrying to report there. Let's have a very quick look at our foreign ministry. No treaties to reply to. Nothing significant to report or speak of there. Okay. Let's pass turn and see what happens. Now, whilst Rita Pasha is sort of the bane of our existence at the moment, activation is actually a feature of the game I really, really like. One of the reasons being is because warfare in most grand strategy games is very mechanical, really. You just move, like a force into an adjacent territory. Even when you have supply and this kind of thing, it doesn't really take into account any of the unpredictable or chaotic features of warfare. And I think that warfare is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. The best laid plans quickly kind of go wrong. That like everyone has a plan until they're sort of punched in the face, I suppose. But that's not an argument against laying plans. Our plan came off rather well. It was to achieve force concentration as quick as possible at Adrianople. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that we were going to do that. Many games I've played, I've not done that at all. So in this case, we did that, and the Russian plan was to kind of plunge headlong towards the capital, try and probably knock us out really, really quickly. And if our forces were strung out, of course, they would have defeated us in detail. It's just that our plan was the correct. Neither of those plans were bad. It's just that in this case, our plan was the correct one. It kind of came off. But I like the fact that you have, you can't just do anything that you want. There's no real way that you can kind of game the system in a way that is the case in most other grand strategy games. It's really mechanical. You learn the basic, principles and rules of how the AI functions, the kind of elementary kind of rules that govern AI movement and this sort of thing. And even with a much weaker power, you use that. Even if you want to play in character, even if you're really interested in the richness of kind of historical gameplay, people inevitably do it. They do it to get out of a crisis so they can carry on playing, because no one likes losing, And I think it makes those kind of games far less fulfilling. I quite like the fact that it's a little bit unpredictable, that you don't quite know what's going to happen, and that you can't just do anything that you want. I think it's really, really good, and it adds a kind of interesting layer to military command, which is fairly distinct to AGOD games as well, incidentally. And it is a much more realistic depiction of warfare. I mean, if we consider the same time period, I think I mentioned McLennan, in a sort of previous video. He's a great example of a commander very much like Rita Pasha, who come hell or high water would not be activated. I mean, after the Union engaged the Confederacy at the First Manassas, they kind of appreciated the magnitude of the problem that they had. In the kind of aftermath of that, they built the Army of the Potomac, which was a colossal army under the command of George McClellan, and he just wouldn't move it. He wouldn't do anything with it, And there were lots of kind of ideas about why some newspaper reporters felt that maybe he was even trying to engineer defeat with an eye on the presidency and this sort of thing. And after nearly a year, he was compelled to move, or he'd be removed from his command. He only really moved when his kind of his position was dependent on it. And he conducted, I think it was the Peninsula Campaign, sailed up the James River with only half his force. He left half sort of back in Washington took half and conducted a sort of campaign up the sort of up the peninsula towards Richmond, and it didn't really go very well. But of course, he split his force and this sort of thing. But he was a great example of approximately the same period that we're in of commanders, and you can imagine Aritza Pasha being exactly like this. And I think the reason being is kind of certain kinds of officers, certain kinds of generals that prize their command. And bear in mind, they spend most of their life in peacetime. They prize their command. They prize their kind of privilege, their status. They feel that there's always an advantage to being in a defensive position. All they have to do is really select the terrain, get support forces to build kind of emplacements and stuff like that. And it's a much more secure thing to do. It's much more comfortable to be on the defensive. It's much less likely that something unpredictable is going to happen. The problem is, of course, is that when these kind of generals, as far as they see it, when they engage in offensive maneuvers, they're confronted on a tactical level with the same kind of unpredictability that we face in the strategic level. Their corps commanders may not play ball. They may not move in the way that they want. It's much less predictable, and it's much more likely to go wrong. And so they're they're reticent to kind of risk their status and their command, engaging in something which they feel is a kind of rolling the dice. But of course, we can see here the long-term ramifications of that caution is really that, in a strange way, it's much more dangerous for them. Their defeat long-term is kind of guaranteed, or at least the defeat of their faction is kind of guaranteed. Here goes day 1. I think they're going to land into Rumelia on day 3. I say land, pass through Rumelia. Day 2, here we go. That is a shame. Yeah, so Abdul Karim Nadir, this is the problem, we don't have force concentration. He lands, he moves into kind of Rumelia before the other forces, doesn't engage with those forces, suffers 15,000 casualties, 8,000 casualties to the Russians. It was a risk. It was always going to be a risk, but my feeling was we couldn't sit tight. We couldn't just sit there and wait for Aritza Pasha. It's not an army-sized defeat, but 15,000 casualties is definitely, not small. That force will have to, be brought back to Adrianople, and he will have to basically switch that force out now with a reserve corps. Okay, we know the size of the Russian force in 50,000. We do have another 2 army corps, one under the command of Omar and one under the command of, I can't think of his name now. Anyway, let's see what happens. Wow. And we achieved a victory, this time with only 5,000 casualties, 14,000, and this looks like it's the remainder of the force, Aritza Pasha, with the other 2 army corps. So he's actually marched to the sound of the guns. He's been compelled now to commit his kind of command and support. This is really, really good. We've taken, how much is that? 100 men. 5,000? Yeah, 5,000 casualties. A shade over. Inflicted 14,000 casualties. A lot of them assault casualties. Excellent. So an initial defeat with the first corps. The spear tip turned away. Suffered heavy casualties. The remainder of the force. Excellent. Let's see what else happens. Oh my gosh, look at the number of prisoners. So we have a little noise notification there that this is regarded an absolutely colossal victory. We've actually destroyed a Corps HQ service asset, so that's one of the army corps. 9 regiments completely destroyed, 7,000 men. It looks like the majority of that force is actually prisoners. That is 12,000 prisoners, 12,400 prisoners, I think. Only 1,000 casualties ourselves. That's absolutely wonderful. And that is Omar Pasha. That's the Imperial Guard. Yeah. Really good news. Okay. It ain't over yet. Or is it? We still have 7 days to go. 8. The anxiety, the tension. Yeah, another 7,200 prisoners and 1,845 casualties. 5 regiments completely destroyed. Oh my god, this is coming off better than I had imagined. Also, Omar Pasha, the Imperial Guard. Omar Pasha is one of my favourite generals, along with Hussein Avni. This guy is a superstar. And completely covering himself in glory. Excellent, okay. Day 15, turn past. I think we'll chalk that up as a win. We'll chalk that up as a win. The first engagement with Abdul Karim, my heart stopped and think, oh my God, we're gonna really sort of pay for this gamble. It seems to have come off. We've destroyed fairly significant Russian forces in the last fortnight. I can't even think the complete number of prisoners and casualties that we've inflicted. A lot of them are prisoners. I think probably the exhausted remnants of Paskovich's army. It looks like significant portions of that force just kind of gave up. They just didn't fancy it anymore. I suppose out of supplies, exhausted, having been defeated twice at Adrianople. Had we have left that, of course, their morale, their cohesion would have improved. They'd receive replacements, and we would not have been in a position to do that. The initial defeat, the first defeat with Abdul Karim, is going to be just really a feature, I think, of the lack of force concentration that we had. His force was slightly faster. It moved into the area beforehand. Well, we can see here then that we've had 3 national morale points gained from battles. So, yeah, really good news this. Let's have a look. So it looks like that 2 of the army corps then made it. Zaif Mustafa, that was the name I couldn't remember. He suffered almost no casualties at all. It looks like the kind of brunt. Oh my God. Do you know what I can see here? A flickering NATO icon. That means that on the basis of that staggering round of combat, that Omar Pasha is now promotable. Excellent news. Abdul Karim, the first corps, then got a bloody nose, an absolute hiding, lost much of his command. Not good news. We'll deposit that force into the citadel. In fact, we won't. In fact, we'll keep it as a separate force because we want to keep that force set to a passive posture to receive replacements as quickly as possible. The garrison force then will detach an army corps and bringing our supplies. So we can see now concretely how our kind of reserve system is working really, really well. We instantly have a force that we can use. He is also activated, incidentally. Really good stuff. Good news. From here, then, what we're going to have to do to promote. Can we actually promote? Okay. Okay, so let's leave that. So we're going to promote Omar Pasha, and he will become our next 3-star general. And I think we can see who he's going to be replacing. Rita, it's been fun. Still not activated. On the basis of a string of victories. Let's actually have a look at the detail of those victories. Trebizond achieved nothing. That force is isolated, and it's besieged Trebizond. Hasn't achieved anything. Failed to engage. Okay, so we're having a look at kind of forces that slip through the net. Yeah, so this is the first battle, Rumelia, the defeat of Abdul Karim, the spearhead, and then Omar Pasha moves in along with Rita Pasha's kind of command. Rita Pasha stays there by the looks of it. First big victory, national morale gain. I mean, what are the casualties? So 5,100. So it's kind of like plus 5,100 prisoners plus about 15,000. That's about 20,000 in the bag. Most of the legwork of that was just an army corps. It was just the Imperial Guard under Omar Pasha. And then, first army committed against Russia. Day 5, Russia succeeded in retreating after day 5 after taking 2 hits. Second battle. Is the big victory then. It's 12,000 prisoners. That's, like a division entirely. Plus 7,000 casualties. Outstanding. That's a more detailed kind of appraisal of what took place. That was a successful run. What we've done then is we've retaken Varna. We've lifted the siege on Rumelia. We can see that there's some damage to the province. The province has been pillaged. This is obviously due to the kind of desperate supply situation. The result of this is complex. We can see straight away that one of the results of this is the Russian forces that have been defeated and other forces have kind of fallen back into Plevna. and have concentrated, and we now have a very large Russian force. They've all kind of fallen back into Plevna. Plevna, strangely enough, the structure is intact, but it had sustained damage. So my thinking is that the siege of Plevna, during that turn, during that 14-day period, was momentarily lifted and allowed the defenders then to repair some of the damage. But that's interesting. We need to think about what to do next. I think I'll probably end the video there because I don't want to do kind of like successive kind of hour-long videos back to back. It'll give me some time also to kind of contemplate and consider where we go from here. In terms of very quickly the situation in the east, okay, we've seen the reappearance then of the main Russian army, and Vorontsov has appeared in Erevan. So, and we don't have very much in place to kind of stop that force. We have a corps, a cavalry division, plus the garrison. Do we try and make a stand? I'm not sure. We'll have to think about that as well. I'll leave the video there. We can see then that we've consolidated control over Batumi, isolating the besieging kind of Grenadier Corps that's besieging Trabzon. We fanned out our kind of Bashi Bazooks now into Sivas and Malatya. So we can kind of, we can kind of keep an eye on what's happening. But this kind of situation looks to be isolated. I think all the kind of combat has been reported on, and you kind of saw come through firsthand. I'll leave the video there, and I'll begin the next video at this juncture in early July 1850, so I can spend some time considering and kind of digesting the information, the victories, and consider where to go from here. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.